At 7 a.m. on January 24th, 1945, a 25-year-old man stood shivering in a frozen command post, his breath fogging in the bitter cold as his body still ached from unhealed wounds that had sent him to the hospital just 3 weeks earlier. He was a slight figure, 5 feet 6 inches tall, a mere 120 pounds, and he'd never finished high school. The nearest school to his family's modest Kentucky tobacco farm was a grueling 15 miles away, a journey too difficult to make regularly. This was First Lieutenant Garland Merl Connor, intelligence officer for the 3rd Battalion, 7th Infantry Regiment, a quiet, humble, farmer-turned-soldier who had enlisted back in March 1941, never once imagining he'd soon be the sole barrier between his beloved battalion and total annihilation. Outside the command post, German artillery screamed relentlessly, their shells slamming down just 400 yards away, reducing towering trees to splintered kindling and churning the frozen earth into a chaotic wasteland of mud and debris. Connor watched sharply, his eyes narrowed with focus, knowing deep in his bones that what came next would test him far beyond the 4 long years of war, 10 harrowing campaigns, 4 deadly amphibious assaults, and 7 painful wounds he'd already endured. The odds stacked against them were utterly impossible. The German 19th Army had massed 600 hardened infantry soldiers and 6 fearsome Mark VI Tiger tanks, massive 60-ton behemoths that could crush American foxholes like they were made of paper, to launch a brutal counterattack near Husson, France. Their target was the Kmar Pocket, the very last sliver of German-held territory in all of France. Every prior attempt to eliminate this pocket had ended in devastating failure. The French First Army had lost thousands of brave men in the effort, and Hitler's ruthless Operation Nordwind had erupted on New Year's Day, leaving nothing but chaos and destruction in its wake. While the infamous Battle of the Bulge raged fiercely 300 miles to the north, the cornered, starving German soldiers trapped in the Kmar Pocket were more dangerous than ever. Desperate men fight with a ferocity that even seasoned troops struggle to match. Connor's 3rd Battalion had held the front line north of the pocket for 18 brutal, unforgiving days. Temperatures hovered at a bone-chilling 10 below zero. No moonlight pierced the inky darkness of the nights, and a thick blanket of snow covered every inch of the landscape, hiding mines and making movement treacherous. Soldiers huddled tightly in their frozen foxholes, their fingers and toes numb from the cold, their nerves frayed to the breaking point. German patrols snuck out under cover of darkness each night, picking off unsuspecting men one by one. In just 2 short weeks, 43 soldiers had been lost, most cut down by relentless artillery fire or unseen snipers lurking in the trees. As an intelligence officer, Connor's job was supposed to be behind the relative safety of the front lines, gathering critical enemy intel, interrogating captured prisoners, mapping enemy positions with precision, a role of strategy and calm, not of direct combat. But Connor was never like other intelligence officers. His courage and loyalty to his men set him apart. 4 long years of war had forged him into a soldier who refused to stay behind when his men needed him most. He'd already earned 4 Silver Stars for acts of direct combat bravery, in Italy, 1943, at Anzio, 1944, in France, 1944, and again in February 1945. Each medal represented a moment when he had risked his own life without hesitation to save the lives of others, making him a quiet legend within the battalion. When despair loomed large and hope seemed lost, everyone in the unit knew that Connor would be the one to step forward, unflinching and resolute. And on this frigid, fateful morning, despair was closing in around them like a noose, threatening to snuff out all hope of survival. At 7:15 a.m., the German artillery barrage intensified suddenly, the shells walking methodically across the American forward positions, as if guided by a cruel hand. Trees exploded in showers of wood and bark. Dirt fountained high into the air, and the deafening sound of destruction echoed through the woods. 12 agonizing minutes of relentless fire, then sudden, eerie, deafening silence that felt even more terrifying than the barrage itself. A young runner burst into the command post, his face ashen white with fear, his voice trembling as he shouted, "Germans advancing! 6 Tigers! Hundreds of infantry! They're moving on our left flank, sir." The battalion commander stared down at the map spread before him, his jaw tight with dread, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. If those massive Tiger tanks reached their positions, they would roll right through the American foxholes, overrunning the entire battalion without mercy. No American tanks or destroyers were available to counter the German armor. They were all tied up in the Battle of the Bulge to the north. Only artillery fire could stop the Tigers in their tracks, but it needed a forward observer, someone brave enough to get close enough to see the enemy advance, adjust the fire coordinates with precision, and guide the shells to their targets with deadly accuracy. The problem? The forward observation post had been completely destroyed in the earlier artillery barrage. The observers stationed there were either dead or seriously wounded, unable to fight. From the safety of the command post, no one could see the advancing Germans. The dense stand of trees blocked all sight lines, hiding the enemy's movements from view. Without a forward observer, the artillery was useless, nothing more than random shells fired into the dark. Without artillery support, the battalion was doomed to be overrun. The commander scanned his men, brave, loyal soldiers all, but untrained and unprepared to run 400 yards across open, exposed ground under enemy fire, alone, to face 6 deadly Tiger tanks and 600 fierce German infantry. Then his gaze landed on Connor, and he knew he had found his man. Connor studied the map intently, his mind racing with thoughts of the terrain, the enemy's tactics, and what would happen to his men if no one stepped up to take the risk. The German advance was coming through the woods just 400 yards away, open, exposed ground where any movement would be instantly spotted by the enemy. Being a forward observer in that spot meant certain death if he was seen, a suicide mission that would require him to risk everything for the men he considered his brothers, his family. Without a single word, Connor picked up a field telephone and 400 yards of heavy wire, his movements calm and deliberate as he met the commander's eyes, his gaze steady, calm, and free of any fear, and then turned and walked out into the deep, powdery snow. He knew full well that German artillery would resume firing at any moment. He had just 400 yards to run, and every single second was critical to the survival of his battalion. He ran as fast as his wounded body would allow, his boots crunching through the snow, the wire unspooling behind him as he clutched the telephone tightly in his frozen hands. His life, and the life of every man in the battalion, depended on him reaching his target. At 100 yards, German guns suddenly opened fire, their shells screaming toward him. Shells landed 40, then 30 yards away, far too close for comfort. They had spotted him, and they knew he was a deadly threat to their advance. A shell hit a large tree 70 yards ahead of him, sending splinters flying in all directions. But Connor didn't slow down, didn't even flinch. Another shell landed 20 yards behind him, the concussion slamming into his back like a sledgehammer. He stumbled forward, nearly falling into the snow, but he quickly regained his balance and pushed on, the wire still unspooling steadily behind him. At 250 yards, a shell exploded directly in his path, destroying a small tree that blocked his way. He vaulted over the splintered remains without hesitation, his movements quick and agile despite his wounds. Shrapnel tore through the branches above him, hot metal hissing as it landed in the cold snow beside him. A shell landed 15 yards to his left, sending a shower of dirt pelting his face and eyes, the blast ringing in his ears so loudly that he couldn't hear anything else. He could only feel the bitter cold and the sharp pain in his body. but he kept running, driven by his loyalty to his men. At 300 yards, he finally reached the American front line, where soldiers peered out of their foxholes, staring at him in utter disbelief. An intelligence officer, unarmed, running straight toward the enemy, not away from them. Connor didn't pause for even a second, pushing 30 yards past the foxholes to a shallow, 18-inch ditch. Barely enough cover to hide his small frame, but just enough to give him a clear line of sight to the advancing Germans. He dropped down into the ditch, relieved to find that the telephone wire was still intact, unbroken by the shelling. Cranking the handset with his numb, frozen fingers, he waited anxiously. Then a voice crackled through the receiver. The Artillery Fire Direction Center, located 3 miles back, with 12 powerful 105mm howitzers ready to fire. Connor gave his position clearly and steadily, no hint of fear in his voice. In that exact moment, he became the battalion's eyes and ears, the only thing standing between them and destruction. Everything depended on him, and he knew he would not fail. Connor peeked cautiously above the edge of the ditch, his eyes scanning the tree line ahead for any sign of the enemy. German infantry was just 200 yards away, moving in tight, disciplined squads, advancing steadily with covering fire from their machine guns. These were veteran soldiers, battle-hardened and fearless, willing to die for their cause. Behind them, the massive Tiger tanks came into view. 4 at first, their heavy tracks plowing through small trees and brush as their turrets traversed slowly, searching for targets. In just a few short minutes, they would break out into the open ground, unstoppable and deadly, ready to crush the American lines. The German infantry hadn't spotted him yet. He was alone, 30 yards ahead of the American lines, hidden in a flimsy ditch, with 600 enemy soldiers closing in around him. One wrong move, one accidental sound, and he would be dead before he could even reach for his telephone. But Connor didn't flinch, didn't show any sign of fear. His face was calm and focused, his eyes locked on the enemy. Lifting the handset to his ear, he gave clear, precise coordinates. Fire mission, enemy infantry 600 meters, adjusting. He knew the shells would take exactly 40 seconds to arrive. 40 long, terrifying seconds where he sat exposed, waiting for death or deliverance. He counted down silently in his head. 38, 39, 40. The sky suddenly screamed with the sound of incoming artillery, the shells tearing through the air above him. 12 shells slammed into the ground 150 yards behind the German infantry, too far to inflict serious damage. The Germans didn't flinch, didn't even slow down. Artillery fire behind their advance meant nothing more than blind defenders, unable to see their movements. But Connor wasn't guessing. He was calculating, using his knowledge of the terrain and the enemy to guide the fire. He grabbed the handset tightly, his voice firm and unwavering. Drop 100. Fire for effect. 18 tense seconds later, the shells hit their mark, slamming directly into the German formation. The forest erupted in a fury of destruction. Trees disintegrated into splinters, shrapnel screamed through the air, and the deafening sound of explosions drowned out all other noise. Each 105mm shell carried 14 pounds of powerful explosive. 12 of them tearing through 600 tightly packed men meant carnage on an unimaginable scale. German soldiers disappeared in clouds of dirt and debris. Others fell to the ground screaming in agony, their bodies torn by shrapnel. The entire advance ground to a halt, the Germans thrown into chaos by the sudden, devastating fire. Connor repeated into the handset, his voice steady. Repeat fire, same coordinates. Salvo after salvo hammered the same patch of ground, turning it into a lifeless killing field where no man could survive. The German infantry scattered, running for cover in the woods, but the Tiger tanks kept coming, all 6 now, emerging from the tree line, their heavy tracks grinding against the frozen earth, their deadly 88mm guns loaded and ready to fire. Connor knew that 105mm artillery shells could damage the tank's tracks or optics, but they could never penetrate their thick, impenetrable armor. The Tigers advanced in a tight wedge formation, their commanders scanning the landscape for targets, their machine guns firing intermittently. One tank fired a shell, obliterating an American foxhole 300 yards to the right. Soldiers inside died instantly, their bodies never to be recovered. Another tank fired, and another foxhole was gone, reduced to a crater in the ground. The Tigers were just 300 yards from the American line, 4 short minutes away from reaching the foxholes. Once they got there, the battalion would collapse completely. Tigers in the rear would mean panic, retreat, and slaughter on a massive scale. The entire American front could fall, and hundreds more lives would be lost. Connor quickly shifted his focus, adjusting the fire coordinates without hesitation. Enemy armor advancing, 250 meters. Adjust fire onto the tanks. He knew that artillery was designed for saturation fire against large groups of infantry, not for targeting small, heavily armored vehicles. But he had no choice, no other way to stop the Tigers. Shells began to fall around the advancing tanks, one landing just 10 yards in front of a Tiger, but the massive tank drove right through the blast unscathed, its armor holding strong. "Drop 50, Connor said calmly into the handset. "Fire for effect." A salvo of shells hit directly among the Tigers, the explosions rocking the ground beneath them. One Tiger's right track snapped clean in two, leaving it immobilized in the snow, still dangerous, still able to fire its guns, but no longer able to advance. Another tank took a shell directly to its engine deck, thick black smoke pouring from the damaged engine as it ground to a halt. 4 Tigers still advanced, but now their focus had shifted. Their commanders had spotted Connor in the ditch, and they knew he was the one directing the artillery fire that was decimating their forces. They were coming straight for him, determined to kill the man who was ruining their advance. Connor glanced down at the shallow ditch around him, 18 inches of dirt and snow, useless against the firepower of an 88mm tank shell. The Germans were just 150 yards away now. He could see their faces clearly, their cold, ruthless resolve as they advanced. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, then lifted the handset to his ear once more, his voice calm and unwavering. "Fire on my position." The fire direction officer on the other end of the line repeated the coordinates, his voice filled with disbelief. Calling fire on your own position meant ordering friendly artillery shells to land just yards away from you, a move that meant almost certain death. "Confirm," the officer said, hoping he had heard wrong. Connor confirmed his order, 3 times, each time more resolute than the last, no hint of hesitation in his voice. He was willing to sacrifice himself, to give up his own life, if it meant saving the lives of every man in his battalion. 40 seconds later, the shells landed 30 yards in front of the ditch, the concussion slamming into Connor's chest so hard that he struggled to breathe, his vision blurring with pain. Dirt and shrapnel screamed overhead, narrowly missing him as he huddled down in the ditch. But Connor didn't move, didn't run. He kept the handset pressed to his ear, his voice steady as he gave another order. "Drop 20, repeat fire." The next salvo landed 20 yards out, the heat from the explosion searing his face, shrapnel flying just 6 feet above his head. The Tigers ground to a halt. Their commanders quickly closed their hatches, unwilling to risk exposure to the deadly shrapnel, buying Connor and the battalion precious time. But the German infantry refused to give up. 200 survivors rallied, using the immobilized Tigers for cover as they advanced once more, determined to reach the American lines. Connor adjusted the fire coordinates quickly, shelling the infantry every time they tried to move forward, and targeting the Tigers every time they inched closer to his position. One Tiger's turret ring was damaged by a well-placed shell, leaving its turret stuck in place. useless in battle. Another tank lost its second track, its crew abandoning it in despair. Two more were cut down by American small arms fire, and three fled back into the woods, their advance broken. Three Tigers remained, and the German infantry was now just 100 yards away, crawling through the snow, flanking Connor's position, trying desperately to cut the telephone wire that connected him to the artillery. If that wire was cut, the artillery fire would stop, and the Germans would overwhelm the American lines in minutes. Connor had been lying in the freezing ditch for 40 long minutes, his body numb from the cold, his wounds throbbing with pain, his head pounding from the concussions. But he refused to quit, refused to let his men down. German artillery soon bracketed his position, their shells landing 20, 15, 10 yards away, methodically closing in on him, trying to pinpoint his location. American and German shells landed in the same 100-yard radius. The small ditch where Connor lay was the focal point of the entire battle. Back at the American lines, soldiers watched in awe, one lone lieutenant calling fire on his own position, refusing to run, refusing to surrender. This was their hero, the man who was willing to die for them. The German infantry pushed to within 80 yards of Connor's ditch. He could hear their commands clearly, the sound of rifle bolts being worked as they prepared to fire. He quickly dropped the fire coordinates 10 yards, ordering shells to land just 60 yards from his position. The concussion from the explosion lifted him off the ground, dirt cascading down on him as he fell back into the ditch. Something sharp hit his left shoulder, a piece of shrapnel, he realized, and numbness spread down his arm. He simply switched hands, keeping the telephone pressed to his ear as he continued to call in fire, refusing to let the pain stop him. The German advance ground to a halt once more, but they didn't retreat. They waited in the snow, hunting him, determined to kill the man who was their greatest enemy. The three remaining Tigers advanced again, spaced 50 yards apart, their bow gunners opening fire with MG-34 machine guns, the bullets tearing through the tree line and suppressing the American defenses. American machine gunners fired back, targeting the Tigers' vision ports in a desperate attempt to blind them. But it was no use. The tanks kept rolling forward, unstoppable. Connor made a quick decision, calling for a mix of smoke and high-explosive shells. The smoke would obscure the Tigers' vision, and the explosive would damage their tracks and optics. Smoke billowed from the ground as the shells hit, hiding the Tigers from view, but their powerful engines roared loudly, giving away their position. One Tiger emerged from the smoke 70 yards from the American foxholes, firing a shell that destroyed an American machine gun position, killing all the soldiers manning it. Connor grabbed the handset, his voice firm. "Danger close." The fire direction officer hesitated. Those coordinates were just 50 yards from Connor's position, a deadly kill zone where even a single misfired shell could kill him. "Fire," Connor said, no room for argument in his voice. The shells hit moments later, one 10 yards behind him, one 15 yards to his left, one directly in front. The Tiger's vision ports shattered, blinding the driver, who lost control and crashed the massive tank into a deep crater. Only one Tiger remained, and the German infantry advanced under the cover of the smoke, determined to reach Connor's position. Connor couldn't see the advancing infantry through the thick smoke, but he could hear them clearly, the sound of their voices, their boots crunching through the snow, the clicks of their rifles as they prepared to fire. He estimated their positions based on the sounds, adjusting the fire coordinates by ear, his sense of focus unbroken despite his pain and exhaustion. The artillery had just 15 minutes of ammo left, 15 short minutes without support, and the Germans would overwhelm the American lines, killing or capturing every man. Connor had been in the ditch for 1 hour and 20 minutes, his body weak from blood loss and cold, his head throbbing from the countless concussions, but he refused to quit, refused to abandon his men. 40 minutes earlier, his assistant, a young intelligence private, new to the battalion but loyal to a fault, had crawled through the snow to join him, bringing extra telephone wire and a backup handset, determined to help his lieutenant. Now the private leaned forward, his eyes wide with fear, as he spotted German soldiers just 15 yards away from the ditch, crawling silently toward them. Connor acted quickly, calling in fire, ordering shells to land just 12 yards out from their position. The concussion from the explosion lifted both men off the ground, dirt and snow cascading down on them. Shrapnel hit the private's left leg, blood staining the white snow around them as he cried out in pain. Connor pulled him deeper into the ditch, trying to shield him from further harm, but the private shook his head, refusing to leave. He grabbed his rifle, his hands trembling but his resolve firm, ready to fight alongside his lieutenant until the end. The last remaining Tiger was just 60 yards from the American line, its machine guns firing relentlessly, suppressing the American defenses and making it impossible for soldiers to emerge from their foxholes. Connor called for maximum concentration fire, 12 shells hitting the tank simultaneously, their combined force enough to disable even the most powerful Tiger. When the smoke finally cleared, the Tiger was blind and immobile, its armor dented and damaged. The crew abandoned the tank in panic, 3 of them cut down by American small arms fire as they fled, 2 managing to escape into the woods. All 6 Tigers were gone, destroyed or abandoned, but 400 German infantry still remained, veteran soldiers desperate and determined, not ready to surrender, not ready to give up their fight. The battalion commander radioed Connor, ordering him to withdraw from his position. Artillery would cover his retreat, ensuring he made it back safely. But Connor refused to leave. His position gave him a clear view of every German move, every attempt to advance. Withdrawing would mean blind artillery fire, a gap in the defenses that the Germans would exploit immediately, costing more lives. The wounded private nodded in agreement, his face pale but his eyes determined. He would stay with his lieutenant, no matter what. 2 hours after leaving the command post, German artillery finally pinpointed his position, their shells landing 20, 15, 10 yards away, methodically closing in on the small ditch. Connor acted quickly, calling for counter-battery fire on the German artillery positions 3 miles back, using his knowledge of the enemy's tactics to guide the shells to their targets. The German artillery fire slackened, then stopped completely, their guns destroyed or abandoned by their crews. Connor shifted his focus back to the remaining German infantry, shelling them relentlessly, keeping them on the defensive, preventing them from regrouping. As the sun rose higher in the sky, its weak light revealing the full horror of the battlefield, a desolate wasteland of craters, destroyed trees, and the bodies of fallen soldiers, both American and German. The remaining German soldiers stared at their losses, at the 6 destroyed Tigers, at the lone lieutenant in the ditch who had single-handedly halted their advance, and Joe Wong washed over them. An 8-man German squad made one final, desperate charge. They broke cover 70 yards from the ditch, but just 40 yards later, Connor's artillery fire hit them, the shells tearing through their ranks. They disappeared in a cloud of dirt and debris. No survivors left. No more advances came. The German attack was broken. The artillery had just 5 minutes of ammo left, but the German attack had completely stalled. The surviving German soldiers pulled back slowly, dragging their wounded comrades with them, leaving their dead behind in the snow. Connor kept calling in fire, pursuing them with artillery shells, ensuring they couldn't regroup and launch another attack, ensuring his men would be safe. 3 long hours after leaving the command post, the German counterattack was finally over. Connor stayed in the ditch for 20 more minutes, his eyes scanning the tree line, watching carefully for any sign of a German regroup, any hint that they might try to attack again. The artillery fell silent, out of ammo, their job done. The battlefield was quiet now, the only sounds the howling of the wind and the distant cries of wounded German soldiers left behind in the snow. Connor slowly stood up, his legs locked stiff from sitting in the cold ditch for so long, his body aching with pain. He reached down, helping the wounded private to his feet, and the two of them began to walk back toward the American lines, step by step, through the snow and debris. Soldiers emerged from their foxholes, staring at them in awe, their faces filled with relief and gratitude as they looked at the cratered ground and the destroyed tigers, unable to believe they had survived. The battalion commander met them halfway, his eyes filled with awe and respect as he shook Connor's hand, unable to find the words to express his gratitude. Medics quickly rushed forward, taking the private to be treated for his wounds. He would survive, they said, and would be back with the battalion in 6 weeks. Connor finally reached the command post, exhausted but relieved, where a medic quickly removed the shrapnel from his left shoulder, a wound he hadn't even noticed during the heat of the battle. So focused had he been on saving his men. After-action reports counted 53 German dead and 78 wounded left behind on the battlefield. But everyone knew the actual losses were far higher, topping 150 soldiers. All 6 Tiger tanks were destroyed or abandoned. American teams moved in to salvage them, gathering valuable intelligence about German armor. The battalion had lost 11 men killed and 23 wounded, most of them in the initial artillery barrage, and not a single loss after Connor took over as forward observer. The Germans never attacked the 3rd Battalion again, their spirit broken by Connor's courage. On February 10, 1945, Lieutenant General Alexander Patch awarded Connor the Distinguished Service Cross, the Army's 2nd highest award for valor, in a small ceremony near the front lines. The battalion commander had recommended him for the Medal of Honor, the highest award for bravery, reserved for those who sacrifice everything. But the paperwork had been too slow, bogged down by the chaos of war. Connor was rotating home soon, discharged from the Army on June 22, 1945, after 28 long months of continuous combat and 7 painful wounds, ready to leave the war behind him and return to a normal life. Connor and Pauline married on July 9, 1945, settling on a small farm on Indian Creek. A simple life with no electricity, no running water, where they farmed tobacco and corn, just as Connor had done as a boy. In 1950, the government bought their land to build Lake Cumberland, forcing them to move to Roland, Kentucky, where they started their lives over again from scratch. Connor went on to lead the Clinton County Farm Bureau for 17 years, devoting his life to helping local farmers and supporting fellow veterans. But he never displayed his medals. He kept them in a small box in a closet, hidden away, a reminder of a past he wanted to forget. When Pauline asked him why he never showed them, he looked at her softly and said, "I did what needed to be done, that's all." 53 years passed and Connor's heroism was all but forgotten by the world, remembered only by the men he had saved and their families. In 1996, a veteran named Richard Chilton contacted Connor, writing to him as he researched his uncle, a soldier who had been killed at Anzio and had served alongside Connor during the war. Connor, now 77 years old, suffering from diabetes and kidney failure, spoke to Chilton at length about his uncle, tears streaming down his face as he recalled carrying the wounded man to safety, staying with him until he died. Pauline, watching her husband's emotion, suggested that Chilton look at Connor's military records, hoping to share more of his story. Chilton opened the small box in the closet, saw the medals, and read the citations detailing Connor's bravery, and he shook with emotion, saying quietly, "This man should have been awarded the Medal of Honor. No one deserves it more." Chilton dedicated himself to fighting for justice for Connor, filing paperwork with the Army, gathering eyewitness statements from surviving members of the battalion, and telling Connor's story to anyone who would listen. But the Army rejected his request twice, citing technicalities and red tape. Connor died on November 5, 1998, at the age of 79, buried with full military honors and his Distinguished Service Cross, never having received the Medal of Honor he so richly deserved. But Pauline refused to give up. She continued Chilton's fight, collecting more eyewitness accounts, resubmitting the request in 2008, and gaining support from historians, authors, and lawmakers across the country. Even 7 retired Army generals endorsed the case, saying Connor's bravery was unmatched. But still, nothing changed. In 2014, Pauline took a bold step, suing the Army in federal court, demanding that her husband's Distinguished Service Cross be upgraded to the Medal of Honor. A judge initially dismissed the case, saying she had waited too long to file. But Pauline appealed, refusing to let her husband's legacy be forgotten. On appeal, a government attorney assigned to the case made a stunning revelation. Her father had served in the 3rd Battalion, 7th Infantry Regiment, and had been wounded the day after Connor's heroic stand at Hewson. She broke down in tears in the courtroom, saying that Connor might very well have saved her father's life that day. It was the turning point in the fight. The Army finally recommended upgrading Connor's award in 2015, and Congress passed a bill waiving the time limit for Medal of Honor nominations. On March 29, 2018, the White House announced that Garland Merl Connor would posthumously receive the Medal of Honor. On June 26, 2018, President Donald Trump presented the medal to 89-year-old Pauline Connor, who accepted it on behalf of her husband, tears of joy and relief streaming down her face. 22 years after Chilton first opened the small box in the closet, 20 years after Connor's death, the Medal of Honor citation detailed his incredible courage. Running 400 yards under enemy fire to act as a forward observer, directing artillery fire for 3 hours straight, calling fire on his own position to stop the German advance, killing an estimated 50 German soldiers, destroying 6 Tiger tanks, and single-handedly saving his entire battalion from annihilation. Connor was one of World War II's second most decorated soldiers, behind only the legendary Audie Murphy. And yet, for most of his life, he was almost completely unknown to the world. If this story moved you, if Connor's courage touched your heart, please hit the like button to help YouTube share his story with more people so that he is never forgotten again. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We rescue forgotten hero stories like this every single day, honoring the men and women who sacrificed everything for our freedom. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Tell us if your family has ever served in the military, if you have a hero in your life whose story deserves to be told. By sharing and commenting, you're keeping these precious memories alive, ensuring that heroes like Garland Merl Connor are never forgotten. Thank you for watching. Thank you for taking the time to hear Garland Merl Connor's story, and thank you for ensuring that he isn't forgotten. These heroes fought for our freedom, sacrificed their youth, their health, and sometimes their lives, never asking for fame or recognition. They just did what needed to be done, because it was the right thing to do. That, my friends, is the greatest bravery of all. The quiet, humble courage of ordinary men doing extraordinary things for the people they love.